Hi, I'm Randy Cantrell. Welcome to the Year of the Peer podcast with Leo Batari. This podcast is based on a simple truth. Who you surround yourself with matters. Author and keynote speaker Leo Batari will interview thought leaders from all walks of life who will share how they leverage peer advantage and show you how engaging your peers more purposefully can hold the key to greater success in business and in life. Today's guest is Robert H. Thompson. Robert is the author of The Offsite, a leadership challenge fable. He's a sought-after speaker, executive coach, journalist, and thought leader in his field. Founder of Applied Performance, a leadership communication services company. His clients have included AT&T, Hewlett-Packard, Johnson & Johnson, Lockheed Martin, and others. He's a senior consultant with the Tom Peters Company in the UK. Before founding Applied Performance, Robert created, managed, and sold a successful regional newspaper publishing company, as well as a national advertising sales company. We welcome Robert to the show.
Robert H. Thompson, great to have you here today. How are you?
It's good to be here, Leo. I'm fine, thanks.
Well, you know, one of the things that I want to let everyone know is we became acquainted a number of years ago when you were working on your book, The Offsite. It was actually, the book was completed. You were looking really, use it as a workbook and to talk with folks. At the time I was at Seton Hall University. I'm sure you were consulting with people all over the country as to how you could take this content and really bring it forward, to more and more people. And I'll tell you, it's one of my favorite books. You know, I still continue to look at it today. It's done in the style of kind of a business fable, of course, and using the principles of leadership challenge, which are timeless, I think, and something we could all use a refresher on from time to time. So I think that story, helps illustrate it in such a great way. But, I'd love to get our audience to get a sense, a little better sense, let's say, other than the bio that Randy just read, of kind of who you are and maybe some of the people who have influenced you along the way. As you know, this whole podcast is about who you surround yourself with matters. So love to chat about that a little bit.
Well, to go into more detail about who I am, my career, if you will, started in the newspaper business. I found, and it was just a job at the San Jose Mercury News in Northern California many years ago, and moved up due to, and you talk about the influencers in life, I came prepared. My dad had a business, and so I came prepared to my career with this sort of knowing customer service, knowing it wasn't something I had to learn.
Yeah.
It was just sort of, he planted it in my heart, and that's where it was. So when I came into the newspaper business, it obviously showed, and I was taken under the wing by a fellow. He was a retail manager of advertising out in an outside office, outskirts of town. His name was Vern Manning, and he's a story that I tell all the time. He's no longer with us, but without Vern, when you go back in life and you look at the various paths that were open to you or not open, or you were totally oblivious to, it's the kind of people like Vern that say, jar the door open a little bit, just open a little bit and see if you're interested. And he brought me into the plant, newspaper plant, to be his assistant. Took me out of the field where I was actually in such a low-level job that it was almost not even a newspaper job. But he brought me into the company. And then from there, I really just worked hard, not knowing that this was going to be my career. Then I found myself enjoying being in the newspaper business. I don't know when that took place, just it was a click, whatever. I found myself in the advertising department. Then I was moved into PR, and it's in the PR office. That's where I really started to learn. And I signed up, went back to school for my journalism degree. And in the PR office, one of my early jobs was to take tours, school kids on tours of the newspaper plant. And now when I go back and I think about what I was saying, and some of the stuff I made up because you just could, is so futuristic, because I was talking about how newspapers would come off your TV set. There would be a roll of paper or some kind of substance. You would take it off every day from the bottom of your TV, and then, you'd recycle that. I had no idea what I was talking about. But the point is that I was predicting the internet, and I didn't even know it. But from there, I found myself moving up in various levels at the company, and was in a management queue. And then I found the first time in my life where somebody was stabbing me in the back, and I had no clue about it. Zero clue. I didn't even know I had knives in my back until after the fact. So I left there, and another person, and I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Bill. Bill Griffin, that was his name. Brain is working. And he took me under, he had some connection to me in the biz, but he said, we went to lunch, and he says, well, now that you're out of there, he says, what group needs a newspaper? And I said, what? And he goes, you should start a newspaper. Now, this is early 1980s. I had no idea that that's what I was going to do, but he convinced me that starting a newspaper would be useful. We found a group that needed some PR, and so I started the newspaper for them, and that led into my own newspaper business, and it grew into different vertical kind of audiences. And I sold that off latter part of the 80s, and I bummed around for a while. During the time that I had the newspaper group, however, I met the other influencers in my life, and they became board members or investors. And there were two, it was in Silicon Valley, but, we didn't have the kind of pizzazz with investors that they have now. And so they helped, obviously. One of them was the bad cop, and the other one was the good cop. And I learned quite a bit. So if I take all of these steps that I've gone through and turn them into experience, right, of having this business, starting it up, selling it for a profit, expanding, doing these kinds of things, I can go in now to any organization for coaching purposes, and I can coach the CEO, I can coach the janitor. It doesn't matter what level, because I've been in all of those seats. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that I now see at this level in my life, is that all of these people, every single one of them along the way, influenced or helped in one form or another. What I didn't have, and I've told you this before, is I didn't have CEO group. I toyed with the idea of doing it, but I never did. That's when Vistage was really young, and there was another company, or maybe it was before it was called Vistage. I can't remember.
It was Tech, right?
Yeah, and I toyed with that, but I never did it. And I look back and I say, well, I should have, but I didn't. So that's the one thing that I encourage CEOs to do these days, is to have a group. In fact, I'm working with a CEO right now in Seattle, and he's new to the seat. He's only been less than that. This is his first CEO gig. And he and I just had the conversation not too long ago where he said, gosh, he goes, they've talked about being the CEO is lonely, but I never realized how lonely. You're the man, or the woman. You're it. And so people are going to, they're going to deal with you in a different way. You're no longer part of the team in that strong sense. So people come to this, they don't get it right away, but eventually, if they have the right coaching or the right team around them, or the peer group, as you say, if they have that right peer group, they can be successful. Sitting down with a group of like-minded people at the same stage, and perhaps the same stage in life, the same kind of job, is so helpful, because everybody has the same kinds of problems. Maybe different days, different kinds of things, but they all have the same problems. And so to get the answers, in 5 seconds instead of, going through years and years of turmoil, it's obvious that a peer group is an ideal situation.
Well, I think too, it's to your point also, when you'll get a lot of advice and you'll get a lot of counsel from a whole lot of people, right? And they all come from their very perspective, and sometimes even self-interest. Where when you are in a CEO peer group, everyone in that group understands what it's like to sit in the chair and have to make decisions for an entire organization. And that's a very different thought process and very different considerations at work there. And there's no question that time and time again, for the groups that I've attended across the country and even different parts of the world, you see how people can share those experiences and what it can mean. To your point, also, not only that you're not alone in feeling this, but you just gain some other perspective, which is great. One of the things you talk about with regard to whether you're coaching the CEO or whomever in the organization, wherever they may be, I always felt that came through really clearly in the offsite, because you've got a lot of different characters there.
Yeah, some say too many.
using characters in its full meaning, I think, too. And there are some real characters in it, but some amazing people that, and many of whom we've met that person, or we met someone just like that, or forming that bit of a group dynamic. But when I think about that book, and I think about kind of what you've just told me now, what kind of got you really interested in the leadership space, and talk about what you do in that space?
Well, I think when I went off in my early retirement, if you will, after I sold the company, I bounced around for a while. I helped other smaller newspaper companies develop some ideas around what they wanted to do and so on in Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley. And I almost bought a bunch of newspapers at that time, but it didn't work for another reason. The thing that drew me to the leadership world is just a strange phenomena, because I sort of wanted to get back into the workplace, and some friends suggested that this other company might like my background, entrepreneur, blah, blah, blah. And so I went over and I talked to these people, and they did. They liked my background. So I said, let's give it a try. And so I wasn't the CEO, but I was a division of this organization. And they were a little bit of, is that just background music for me?
It must be, yeah.
Yeah. So they were intrigued with my background of being an entrepreneur, but it turned out as we were going forward that they didn't understand the definition of being entrepreneurial, and so they wanted a lot of corporate red tape started to show up, and so it didn't work out. But during that process, it was a couple of years, I met up with a fellow who was doing time management workshops. And I brought him in to work with my team. And he and I sort of hooked up, and we became friends to some degree. And so when I left that organization, I decided, well, I'll market him and be the sales marketing guy for him, because I liked what he did and how he did it, and so on and so forth. And so I hooked up with about 60 of my good friends, and I said, I want to bring this guy in, and he's going to do a workshop for you. I really support him, and so on and so forth. And they all said yes, and they all paid money. And then, I don't know, it was a week or 2 weeks before the event, he called and said he couldn't come. And he said, but you know what, Robert? I think you'll be good at this. And I went, yeah, exactly like that. Total silence. What? He said, I'll tell you what, I'll send you all my slides. Now, these are not PowerPoint slides. These are like 35 millimeter slides.
Right.
I'll send you all the slides. And I have my tape. He had a whole tape cassette thing. And so I sat down at my dining room table and I played his tapes. I swear to you, this is true. And I wrote every word down that he said and timed it with the slides. I had never, ever done this before. And now I was going to, in a matter of days, stand up in front of people I knew and deliver this program that I'd never delivered before.
Sure.
Well, it went okay.
That's good.
I liked it. And so I kept doing it. But then that sort of faded because the time management thing was, you know, it had its day and so on. It's still out there, but it's much more, you know, common sense. But what happened was I was online. We did have online at that point, and I was looking for something. I was a part of ASTD, the training and development group.
Yep.
I had joined. I wasn't a member of anything of the group in a big way, but I was just a member of it. And all of a sudden, an email came by with Jim Kouzes, who I knew his wife, his first wife. And it said, you know, whatever it said, I can't remember what it said, but it was talking about, you know, another leadership challenge thing. And during this time, I had bought my first leadership challenge book that was used at a, you know, Goodwill or whatever kind of a thing, used book, and was going through it. And I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. You know, it sort of puts things into perspective. Didn't know Jim, didn't know Leadership Challenge, didn't know Tom Peters, although I had Tom Peters' book, you know, Search of Excellence, but whatever. I then sent an email to the Tom Peters Company, which was at that time called something a little different. And the salesperson asked me to come in thinking that because I had clients in the time management sphere, that I was going to bring my time management clients in. When I met with this person, their focus was, no, you need to become a facilitator for the Leadership Challenge. And I, once again, went, what?
Yeah.
And at that time, Jim walked through the conference room where we were sitting. He had no clue I was. I knew his wife, but I didn't know him. And he took the time to spend with me and chat, which I thought was kind of cool. And the next thing I knew, I was delivering my first Leadership Challenge course. And it was the most awkward thing ever because I really didn't have the material, you know, embraced totally.
Sure.
It was outdoor in a big park. I had to stand on a picnic bench. I had no slides. I had no presentation, whatever. It was early morning. It was freezing cold, and all these people were standing around. And I made this presentation, and it went okay, except there was a couple of things that I learned very early on about not doing certain things. But that's
why they call it the Leadership Challenge, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, that was where it started, right? And so then, because that went well, I got hooked up as a facilitator. And so I started delivering around the country, meeting the colleagues that I now have, and getting obviously to know Jim and Tom and Barry and so on very well. And that's how it all, that's the genesis of it. You know, it was really sort of a crapshoot, throwing the dice and let's see what happens. And it worked out for 20 some odd years so far.
Well, if your goal is to surround yourself with the right people, that was some pretty right people you surrounded yourself with there, didn't you?
Again, not on purpose. You know,
Sure.
It wasn't like I on purpose said I need to surround myself. They just sort of came to me. And I think there's something to that for people too, is that if you have this, if you're open to an experience,
That's right.
people will come. They will help you, you know, climb to the top. Now, I'd have to say that if any of my colleagues are listening, there was some of them that got very jealous when I produced the offsite, because there's only two of us out of the entire group that actually wrote a book, Steve Barber and myself. And so there was some of that. But what I know, you know, because we've had this conversation, is that the offsite was actually a huge book to start, because what it was, I just started writing about all of us, all of my colleagues going off to an offsite, because we used to go 2 at a time, and we would spend 3 days with a group and so on. It's unheard of these days, but we would go off and we'd spend 2-3 days with the client, and there would be 2 of us, and so we'd have the evenings, and so we all became very close. And so what's on the cutting room floor of the offsite book is probably the real meat and blood of how we, you know, there was many times where we were not politically correct in the evening, having way too many drinks, and then getting up in the morning, you know, that kind of thing. But literally, in the book I wrote, you know, we were really cowboys. We were modern day cowboys, and we would get on a plane and we would fly to just about anywhere. and we'd figure out a way to get to where we needed to go, because you didn't have Uber, you didn't have these things, you didn't have taxis in some of the places. You had to take a lot of buses and whatnot, and you'd hope that materials were there, and then you'd deliver this program. And for the most part, the program was always, raved about. Today, there's an awful lot of knockoff kinds of things out there, which troubles me, but without the research behind them and so on and so forth. But that's just the way things are these days.
So when you deliver these programs, I was curious because, I'll do these workshops, of course, for CEO groups and key executive groups around the country. And it always strikes me that while on one hand, I'm very much speaking to individuals in the room who have different mental models, who are taking the material very differently. At the same time, there's very much a group dynamic going on in terms of how they learn together. And so, for you in the training you've done, how do you see that dynamic driving understanding and driving people's ability to take what they've learned and actually do something with it when it's done?
Well, that's the beauty of the Leadership Challenge, because it's common sense for the most part. What Jim and Barry did is they didn't create, they just discovered it by asking questions. And it took many years, from I think it was the later part of the 80s when they first began their research at Santa Clara University. And so they kept asking people, when you're doing your very best, what are you doing? And then they deciphered that from all the flip chart paper on the wall. And they came up with the various things: challenge, process, inspire, shared vision. Those words have been tweaked over the years, and how they play. At first it was this way, and then they shifted them around a little bit. It's really an individual thing, no matter what, unless an organization really embraces the concept and allows it to change their culture. If an organization does not, if they don't fully embrace, the individuals can still become very successful, because the elements of Leadership Challenge are things that you use every day. To challenge the process doesn't mean, like a lot of people think, that means you need to throw rocks at your boss. That's not it. It's about being innovative. And so if you can do your janitorial job in an innovative way, that's challenging the process. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO or not. So the culture can shift. Maybe it shifts a little slower if it's not embraced by the whole company.
Yeah, I think the challenge, the process piece, to your point, is very much tries to get people to not just think to themselves, oh, we do it this way because we've always done it this way, right? I mean, the whole point of challenging the process is to continue to ask questions. Times change, life changes, markets change, and sometimes, things that worked well 5 years ago or just were done for no good reason. That have sometimes endured and survived over time. I also, though, I will say, love the point you make about how the Leadership Challenge is common sense. I mean, when you think about all of the great, I don't care if it's business book, whatever kind of book it is, the central premise usually is pretty common sense. If you think about like a Howard Gardner, right? How brilliant this guy is. And he basically says, look, the theory of multiple intelligences, fine. Yes, people are smart in different ways. Of course, we all knew that. We've known it forever. I didn't invent that, but he codified it. He had the research and he codified it in a way that put it out there. And I think talking about it in terms of intelligences is what really challenged people. He could have called it a lot of different things, but once you start challenging IQ as being central and I think it's, from my view, it's been comforting to all of us that, we all could take the same test and we might not have the highest IQ in the world. However, we can be smart in really, profound ways, musically, creatively, whatever, and,
the old saying about what the A students call the B students now in their careers.
Boss, yeah.
The B students are a little more adaptable, and they're able to move this way, move that way, where the A students just think they memorize stuff and they got it right in tests.
So we had Trent Sanderson on the program a number of weeks ago, and he trains elite athletes, and he actually refers to it as what the A students call the C students.
So it's got lower.
Yeah, bigger dip there, you know. But no, I just think that is really true, and I'll tell you, I think that obviously the principles of leadership challenge. You know, Jim Kouzes was on the program very early on, and spoke to those principles, but he also, you know, we were speaking to a more recent book he had written where he talked about how important it is for you know, us to, as leaders, to get people to learn together, and that we learn better when we learn together. And you know, and I guess that's what I was trying to get to a little bit with the workshop. Not so much. I know sometimes, especially when you get people from different companies, and they will, you know, they'll go back to their own organization. They weren't at that workshop, so sometimes it's very difficult for that person to kind of bring everyone else along. But I think for the people who are in the room, I think a lot of their takeaways are that much more powerful, because you may put them in situations where they're not just focused on you all the time, but you get them working and learning from one another. And that can be very powerful as well, right?
Yeah, one of the things on that, I mean, that's absolutely true, that if you have an intact group in the room, you can facilitate in a much different way. And one of the comments that usually comes, and most of the time, as I go back and into the early workshop time, people were sent, and when they came to it, they thought, I'm broken, I'm here to be fixed, and that's what I've heard from my boss. Then they go through the program and they get the concepts that are very simple, common sense. Then we give them the material so they can turn it into common practice and, you know, common everyday activity. The problem they go with is, well, my boss needs to do this.
Exactly. My boss is broken.
And so that's what the LPI is for. See,
yes.
Because if you have the LPI, the Leadership Practices Inventory, or a survey, right? It doesn't have to be that one, but it definitely needs to be, or should be, a survey that has some background to it, some data. But the LPI is one of the best. You get a sense of yourself, and then your boss has to participate in that because they have to give you, you know, some feedback. And then your goal there is to take that opportunity and go back to your boss and say, now you've given me this feedback, so where do we go from here? So it becomes a learning event for everyone. And usually in the past, what that did is it manifested so that the CEO or the senior team came to these programs, because as you know, you just said, most of them all thought they were perfect and they just needed these other people to get, you know, fixed. And that's a big problem in the business that I'm in now, because people, when I go in to coach somebody, if it's a mid-level, the first thing out is, you know, am I broken? Is that why you're here? And I go, no, because if I'm coaching you because they told me that you're broken, then I'm not going to be here, because I don't do that. But if I were, I would tell you, you're broken, you should quit and move on with your life in another way, because this is not going to work for you because somebody thinks you're broken. So that's the hurdle to get over with coaching, is that.
Yeah, and I think just reinforce for them that the only reason the company is investing in you is because they believe in you. I mean, the fact is that, you know, they're at a place in their career where they see a lot of potential in them, and they know if if someone work with them and invest time with them, that'll really bring some real fruit. And
what that does is it can begin the process to change the culture of the organization. For instance, this company up in Seattle, terrible. Over the last couple of years, they've been getting through stuff, getting rid of senior management, lots of people, terrible culture. I mean, one of the worst I've ever seen. In fact, I might even write a book about it. It's just god awful the way this company was being run. And I won't share what company it is because that would be wrong. It's not Microsoft and it's not Amazon. And I said Seattle, so it's not those companies. But the thing is that now there's a person in charge who wants to see the shift. And so some of the people still in the executive room want to go with that, but everybody's dragging some baggage from the past with them. And so first we have to acknowledge that everybody has some baggage. that they need to get rid of and or acknowledge. And maybe you won't get rid of all of it, but at least if you acknowledge that behavior comes from this baggage, you can move on and change the culture. And so what I do is I give them some little tiny tidbits of how to change the culture with some things they can do every day. Because no one, you can't just jump into a leadership challenge course for, 100 people and expect that to just be it. You've done and you're on. It's going to take time. So the way to do it is to get into the weeds with them and start to show what's going on and why people are behaving the way they're behaving. Some people want to just fire people. Well, they're not fit in. Well, you don't just fire them, and the old thing of, I don't know who was Blanchard or whatever, fire them up, The issue is you need to get everybody to be more transparent with how they're feeling about coming into work and so on and so forth. And once you get that done, it begins to settle down. People start to take on the leadership aspects and change the culture. And it takes years.
Yeah, I also would like to think that there's a whole generation of leaders coming up right now who've had the benefit of the Leadership Challenge and similar type leadership training, where the biggest takeaway for me when I went through it myself, and then of course with all the graduate students that I've worked with, particularly at Seton Hall over the years, who they would read the Leadership Challenge, they would see all these cases, and they would look at all this work, and they were like, I knew it, like I knew that this was kind of the right way to lead and not the way that, because their experience is typically command and control, just
management,
beat the crap out of people, type of leaders. And all of a sudden this idea of, instead of lighting a fire under someone, to light the fire within, right, becomes a very different concept, and something that people intuitively believe and understand. And I think, my hope is that as, more and more people get exposed to this, they will lead like that. They will.
One of our biggest things with Leadership Challenge was to get people to understand that, and I share this in the book quite a bit, is that management is about handling things, and leadership is about taking people to new places. And leadership is how you get the management done. But a lot of times in the past, I think it's shifted quite a bit now, but in the past, management was taught at the university level, maybe an MBA, and leadership was, a section, a chapter in a book about how to lead. And so it really didn't give people at the time any real idea of this leadership thing. Everything morphed into this management model. What I try to tell people is, no, leadership is separate. It's something that doesn't take more time. It's how the management gets done, because you hear that in my business too. Well, I don't have time to coddle people. I don't have time for this soft stuff. And that makes me ill when I hear people call leadership soft stuff, because it's anything but.
It's completely silly. But this is where I think that the character in your book, Sam Arthur, was so powerful, because, and I think it is this obvious, right? So when you look at how Sam tends to everything, right? I mean, he makes sure that all the plants have enough water and sun, and they have the perfect environment from which to grow and thrive, right? Sam doesn't run around the place screaming at the plants to grow faster, right? Or to, or to grow in this direction, or do whatever. That isn't how that goes.
It's not how it works.
And as absurd as that sounds, right? Because God knows, I hope you've got no one screaming at plants in their backyard. It makes no more sense to do it in the workplace. I mean, it just really doesn't. And it's certainly, I think people unfortunately find this lighting a fire under someone a very quick fix, short term, get someone and then that works. So then they think they want to do it all the time. And we all know it's a very bad long-term leadership strategy. You're not going to keep someone around very long, at least who's capable of going somewhere, right?
Well, you burn them out, and you can only have so much heat underneath them. And again, a lot of that, going back into where people come into the workplaces, a lot of that is how they're raised. Raised in a household that is not leader-like,
right?
It can be a problem in the career, and so then you become this autocrat because that's how your dad did it, or that's how your mom did it, and you're a dad or a mom, and so demand your kids to do certain things. Whoa, and that's silly.
Because I said so,
Because I said so. don't smoke as they take a drag off their cigarette. Yeah, so a lot of that happens in the home. There's no question about it. In early schooling, the teacher is a dictator. You pick up that as a kid. If they make you memorize everything instead of, as you see now, you were talking about how in the workplace and in workshops people learn better together, right? Same thing in the classroom. But when I was growing up in school, we didn't come together as a classroom and work on projects. We did vertical things. It was like, here's Robert's thing, and here's Sally's thing, and here's Joe's thing, and so on and so forth. It was individual. It wasn't group. But now they do that differently, and that's a good thing. I think education has a lot to be desired these days from the results that some of the schools are getting. But I think at least with the team kind of activity, that's a much better way to get started, because that's what the career is going to look like.
When you talk about our parents and how they may have parented us, I think it's not till we get older that we realize that our parents were kids when they were our parents, right? They were in the early 20s or something. I mean, they didn't know anything. I mean, and I think for many parents, as they get older, they fall into two categories. I think by and large, they all evolve and they all learn and they all get better and all that. Some will admit it, and others will say, "Oh no, I was always that way." Like really,
Really,
yeah, not how I recall it when I was 10. But no, it's so true. But I also think one of the things that our parents really instilled in us, and get you to comment on this too, is they really cared about who you hung around with as kids. They paid attention to who your friends were, because they really understood what that could mean as far as your own behavior and your own interests and whether you were going to get in trouble or not, or things like that. I mean,
it was mostly, for me, it was mostly whether I was going to get in trouble or not.
Yeah. Just keep you out of trouble.
So it's the peer group kind of a thing has its play when you're little and all the way through life. There's no question about it. Who you hang out with is going to sort of mold how you become and how you see the world, and that's just a true statement, right? As far as I know, I don't think it's fake news. I think you're right there. Just as a final thought, if you have any, I think what you've said is pretty consistent, certainly with my experience, and I think with a lot of our guests, that oftentimes we find ourselves where we are today, not because we had some grand plan 30 years ago and, here we are. But we met people along the way, and we were open to new things, and we were open to new ideas and new people and new places. And, on one hand, I think it can very much be a happenstance in terms of who we run into. And on the other hand, I think we can also be purposeful about it. And I think in terms of that, how might you advise people, if they have an interest in pursuing anything, how can they be more purposeful about the people they surround themselves with? Well, I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, is to engage yourself at various places where those people are going to be. For instance, when I was in my own business,
so fish where the fish are, right?
Yeah, I joined Rotary. I had to wait. My wife and my first editor, who was a woman, wouldn't allow me to join Rotary until they would take women. But as soon as they did, I could join. And I agreed with that. By the way, it wasn't like this was I needed to be the all boys thing. In Rotary, then it became a large peer group in a way. Because every time you're meeting once a week with these folks, you would hopefully sit at different tables. Not always. Sometimes there was cliques that would form. But I found myself at the Rotary good. Are you there, Leo?
I'm right here. I think the internet got hung up just a little bit on us here, if you can hear me. But anyway, I just want to let everyone know that your book, The Offsite.
Okay.
Your book,
It was
The
a little
Offsite.
freezing there.
Yeah, it was a little freezing there, but I was just kind of reiterating that your book, The Offsite, is just a terrific read. I would encourage everyone, if they haven't read it already, to go on Amazon or wherever they choose to shop for their books and get a copy of The Offsite, because it truly is just packed with really great leadership lessons that I think would benefit anyone. And is there a particular website or anything right now that we should direct people to as far as wanting to learn more about you and kind of what's next with you, Robert?
Well, they can go to my website, the leaderinsideout.com. There's plenty of information about me there if they wish. And yeah, pick up the book if they'd like. There's one thing I want to make sure I leave with your listeners.
Right.
Who ask me, what is the most basic coaching thing that I can do with people? And in the book, it's well down, because I didn't, when the book was written, I didn't bring it up to the top as much, but now I have. And there's 4 questions that I like to have people share with each other, whether you're recruiting someone or hiring in any way, shape, or form, or just in your day-to-day. And those 4 questions I call the fast-forward questions, and they will change your culture, not overnight, but very quickly. And the 4 questions are very simple, and people may have even heard of them before, but maybe not all bundled together. Now, the fast-forward questions are, what can I do more of? What can I do less of? What can I start doing? What can I stop doing? And if people begin to ask those questions on a regular basis to each other, and again, if you're recruiting somebody, you say, what would the company that you left, what would they have needed to do more of, less of, start and stop to keep you? You'll learn a great deal about that person. But I think those 4 questions, Sam would be very proud that those are now out and about being used on a regular basis, because I think it's very powerful, but very simple, very common sense. And so that's my advice for the day.
Well, it's great advice for everyone else, and you've certainly given me a lot of great guidance over the years, and not the least of which, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that this new book that's coming out in spring, in many respects, was, I think you provided the core idea for that, for me, and really just got me thinking about how to put a book together that would really capture all of these things that I've been fortunate enough to learn during the year of the peer, and all these amazing people that have been generous enough to be guests on the show and who have surrounded me over, this period of time. And I just want to thank you for that, and for the ongoing contribution you make.
It's an honor to, it's, again, service is my business. It's
there you go.
An honor to your friendship and to be able to be helpful.
Oh, it's great. Hey, wonderful having you in the show. You have a great day.
You too. Take care now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about Peer Advantage, to submit questions to Leo and our guest, and to subscribe to the Year of the Peer podcast, please visit us at leobottary.com. It's leobottary.com. This podcast is produced by me, Randy Cantrell, hosted, of course, by Leo Bottary. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod, Vibe Ace, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.